A cold evening breeze moved across the quiet street as Mira drove her small blue car home after a long day at the courthouse, her mind tired yet calm as she replayed the hearing she had handled earlier that afternoon, each step of her work reminding her of the responsibility she carried, and she wanted nothing more than to reach home and rest with a warm cup of tea waiting on the table. But the moment she turned the corner near Oak Ridge Station, she noticed red and blue lights flashing behind her. And before she could even think, the siren gave a short, sharp burst that made her grip the steering wheel tighter, wondering why she was being stopped when she had followed every rule on the road. She guided the car to the side and waited with steady breath, watching the officer walk toward her with a serious expression that made the air heavy around them, and as he reached her window he tapped lightly before asking her to roll it down, his voice firm but not rude, though his tone carried a weight that felt unnecessary for a simple stop. And Mira kept her voice steady as she greeted him and asked what the issue was, hoping there had been some simple misunderstanding that would be solved. In a moment, the officer, named Ryan, held a small device in his hand and explained that the system had flagged the car as possibly stolen, and he wanted her to step out so he could check the registration, his words coming out sharp and automatic as if he had already made up his mind, and Mira felt a knot tighten in her chest because she knew the car was hers, bought legally, registered correctly, and driven for years without a single problem, yet the way Ryan spoke made her feel like she was already being treated as guilty before she had even spoken a single sentence in her own defense. She stepped out calmly, maintaining her composure even when Ryan looked at her with suspicion rather than fairness, and she handed him her documents while explaining that the car belonged to her and that the system must have made some error. But Ryan barely listened as he glanced at the papers, shaking his head as if he doubted every word she spoke, and he asked more questions in a way that made her feel unseen and unheard, as though her quiet confidence only annoyed him further. A small crowd began to gather at a distance, drawn by the flashing lights and the rising tension in the air, and Mira could feel their eyes on her, whispering guesses about what might have happened, each whisper adding another layer of pressure that she carried silently, because she knew that arguing would only make things worse. So she stood there with steady breath while Ryan moved around the car checking every corner like he expected to find hidden secrets buried inside the seats or tucked under the hood. He then asked her to sit on the curb while he called the station to verify her information, and although his tone remained professional on the surface, there was something sharp and impatient beneath it, something that stung more than she wanted to admit, and Mira lowered herself onto the edge of the sidewalk with dignity, reminding herself that anger would not help her in this moment. That patience and clarity were the only tools she had to navigate the misunderstanding that had wrapped itself around her evening like an unexpected storm cloud. When Ryan returned, he wore an expression that only grew more rigid, and he told her that according to the system the car had been reported stolen 2 days ago, which shocked her because she had been driving it the entire week without any issue, and she tried to explain once more that the report must have been filed by mistake or connected to another vehicle with a similar number. But Ryan cut her off with a curt gesture that left her feeling smaller than before, his doubt lingering like a shadow that refused to move away from her. He placed soft restraints on her hands, not rough but firm enough to send a wave of disbelief through her chest, and she looked up at him with a steady gaze as she asked why he could not wait for clearer verification before making such a decision. But he avoided her eyes and guided her toward the patrol car as if procedure mattered more than common sense. And even though she wanted to protest, she remained silent, knowing that anything she said in this moment would only deepen the mistrust in his mind. Inside the patrol car, Mira stared out of the window at her own vehicle sitting under the streetlight, a sight that felt strange and distant, as if the world had tilted slightly in the wrong direction, and she wondered how a simple drive home had turned into a humiliating scene in front of strangers who would never know the truth behind her quiet strength or the life she lived with honesty and dedication. Because all they saw now was a woman being taken away for something she had not done. The ride to the station was slow and heavy, filled with silence broken only by the crackle of the radio, and Mira kept her eyes forward, trusting that the truth would soon be revealed, trusting that her patience would not be wasted, trusting that this moment would pass even though it felt like a long shadow stretching across her path, and deep inside she knew that tomorrow would bring clarity, even if tonight felt unfair in every way. When they reached the station, Ryan led her inside with the same rigid manner, and she cooperated with every step, every question, every request, believing that her calmness would speak louder than any argument she could offer. And as they processed her information and took her statement, she noticed the first signs of doubt flickering across Ryan's face, a shift in his posture, a faint hesitation in his voice, as though he had begun to realize that something about the situation did not make sense the way he thought it did. But the night continued its slow march, and Mira remained in the holding area while the officers tried to sort out the confusion, and she sat quietly with her hands folded, thinking about the courtroom she worked in, the lessons of patience she often gave to both sides, the importance of fairness she carried every day. And she wondered how different everything would look when the sun rose again and everyone finally understood who she truly was and how wrong this moment had been. Morning light filtered through the small window of the holding area as Mira sat with calm breath, her mind steady despite the long night she had endured, and she knew that the truth would surface soon because mistakes could not remain hidden once the right eyes examined the reports. Yet she also felt a quiet ache inside her chest from the way she had been treated without a chance to explain anything clearly, a feeling that clung to her like a thin layer of dust after a long journey. At the front desk Ryan stood with his arms crossed as another officer checked the system again, his brows drawn together in confusion as the new report showed that the stolen vehicle alert had been corrected earlier that morning, erased from the system after the original complainant realized they had written the wrong plate number on the form, and the update had been sent out only minutes after Mira had already been taken in, making the entire ordeal feel even more senseless than before. Ryan rubbed his forehead as he stared at the screen, feeling a slow wave of discomfort rise through him, and although he tried to hide it behind a stiff posture, he could not ignore the unease building inside his chest, because something about the night replayed in his mind with sharp clarity, from the moment he stopped Mira to the cold expression he had carried while questioning her, and now that the error was clear, he felt an unfamiliar pressure inside his conscience, heavy and unsettling. Another officer moved to unlock the door of the holding area and guided Mira to the front desk, speaking kindly and offering her an apology for the confusion, but Mira only nodded with quiet grace, her voice steady as she answered their questions with polite calm, and though her heart still carried the sting of the experience, she refused to let frustration take the lead, because losing control of her emotions would not change what had already happened. Ryan finally stepped forward, his voice lower than before as he told her she was free to go, that the incident had been resolved, yet his words lacked the confidence he usually carried on duty, and Mira looked at him with a level, thoughtful gaze, seeing something in his eyes that was different from the night before, something unsure, something almost unsettled, as if he had begun to recognize how quickly he had judged her without giving her a fair chance to speak. She answered politely that she understood systems made mistakes and she was willing to move on, but her tone remained distant, not cold but carefully measured, carrying a quiet strength that reminded everyone in the room that she was not someone easily shaken. And when Ryan handed her belongings back to her, she thanked him calmly before walking out of the station with the same dignity she had held since the moment she had been stopped. The sunlight outside felt warm against her skin as she walked toward her car, which had been brought to the station earlier that morning, and she paused for a moment beside it, letting her fingers rest on the door handle while she gathered her thoughts. And even though she wanted to put the whole experience behind her, she could not fully ignore the discomfort of being treated as if she were guilty despite having done nothing wrong. Back inside the station, Ryan stared at the door long after she had left, replaying her calm expression, the steadiness in her voice, the quiet disappointment she had tried to hide, and he felt something sink deeper within him because he could not shake the understanding that he had failed to see her clearly, that he had allowed suspicion to lead instead of fairness, and that mistake weighed on him more heavily than any other error he had made in his years on the force. Later that afternoon he walked to the briefing room for a meeting with the chief, hoping to clear his mind, but the moment he stepped inside he saw a set of legal folders neatly arranged on the table, each bearing the court seal, and he heard one of the senior officers mention that a new judge would be visiting the station the next day for a scheduled review of procedure and community outreach concerns, a detail that caught Ryan's attention though he could not say why. At the same time Mira returned home and rested briefly before preparing for her next day at the courthouse, reviewing case summaries, hearing schedules, and notes she had taken earlier in the week, her mind sharp and focused even though she still carried the weight of the previous night, and she paused only once to breathe out slowly, reminding herself that she had seen many unfair moments in her career and she had learned how to rise above them with calm strength. Morning arrived with a quiet hum as Mira dressed in her formal robe, adjusting the collar and smoothing the fabric with steady hands, her expression calm and composed as she prepared for another day of hearings. And although she would not mention the events of the previous night unless necessary, she knew that fairness required her to acknowledge how easily mistakes could be made when assumptions guided decisions instead of facts. Across town Ryan adjusted his uniform in front of the mirror, but today something felt different inside him, a small knot in his stomach that he could not ignore, as if the air carried a warning or a reminder he did not yet understand. And as he prepared to attend the station meeting with the visiting judge, he wondered what kind of person they would send, what kind of presence they would bring into the room, unaware that his path had already crossed with that person in a way he would never forget. As the station prepared for the meeting, officers gathered in the main hall, standing at attention as the doors opened, and a hush fell across the room as the visiting judge stepped inside with calm authority, her robe flowing softly with each step, her posture steady, her gaze composed, and Ryan felt the world tilt for a moment as he recognized the face he had seen only the night before, the same quiet strength, the same calm eyes, the same woman he had handcuffed under the streetlight during a misunderstanding that now burned in his memory with sharp clarity. Mira walked forward with grace, fully aware of the eyes upon her yet unbothered by them, and the room remained silent as Ryan stood frozen in place, feeling the weight of realization crash over him like a sudden wave, his breath catching slightly as he struggled to steady himself, because he now understood that he had not only misjudged her but had done so to someone who carried a position of immense responsibility, someone who upheld fairness every day with calm dignity. A quiet tension filled the room as Mira stood before the officers, her calm presence commanding attention without raising her voice or changing her steady posture, and Ryan felt his breath tighten as he watched her move with dignity, each step reminding him of the mistake he had made the night before. A mistake that now felt heavier than ever as he realized that she had handled the entire incident without revealing who she truly was or demanding special treatment, even though she held a position that deserved deep respect. The chief welcomed her politely and invited her to sit at the head of the table, and she nodded with a quiet grace, taking her place without hesitation while the officers gathered around, listening with full focus as she began to explain the importance of fair procedure, community trust, and the responsibility that law enforcement carried when dealing with the public, her voice steady and clear as she addressed them with the kind of wisdom earned through years of experience rather than authority alone. Ryan sat at the far end of the table, trying to maintain a neutral expression but unable to shake the memory of her sitting on the curb the night before, calm yet hurt, patient yet firm, and he felt a deep ache inside his chest as he watched her speak now with the same quiet confidence, realizing that she had shown more restraint and dignity under pressure than he had shown even in a simple traffic stop, and the contrast struck him with painful clarity. As the briefing continued, Mira walked around the room, observing their procedures, asking thoughtful questions, and offering guidance on matters of fairness and communication. And each time she spoke, other officers nodded in agreement, because her explanations were simple yet powerful, rooted in understanding rather than judgment. And Ryan found himself wishing he had listened to her with the same attention the night before when she tried to explain that the car belonged to her. During the demonstration of standard protocols, Mira paused near the board where reports were displayed, her eyes scanning the diagrams with a careful expression, and she pointed out how a single error in data entry could lead to confusion or wrongful assumptions, her tone calm but unmistakably meaningful as she spoke about the need for verification before taking action. And although she never mentioned her own experience directly, the room understood the weight behind her words. Ryan lowered his eyes for a moment, his thoughts turning inward as he remembered how quickly he had relied on the system's alert instead of verifying her information with patience, and the realization struck him that he had allowed impatience and assumption to guide his actions, a truth that felt uncomfortable yet necessary for him to accept if he wanted to grow beyond the mistake he had made. At the end of the session, the chief asked Mira if she had any final recommendations for the officers, and she looked around the room with a steady gaze, her voice warm yet firm as she explained that the most important quality an officer could carry was fairness, the strength to listen before judging, and the courage to admit when they had acted too quickly. And though her tone remained professional, Ryan felt each word settle deep inside him like a quiet reminder placed gently before him. When the meeting ended, officers rose from their seats and thanked her for her time, impressed by her calm manner and the clarity of her guidance, but Ryan remained seated for a moment, unsure whether he should approach her or remain silent, and the hesitation held him in place until the chief gave him a small nod as if encouraging him to step forward and face the truth with sincerity rather than hiding behind silence. Gathering his courage, Ryan walked toward her, his steps slow and uncertain, and when Mira turned to look at him, he felt the strength of her calm gaze settle over him, not harsh or accusing but simply expectant, inviting him to speak honestly, and he took a steady breath before telling her that he wanted to apologize for how he had handled the incident the night before. His voice low and sincere, as he explained that he should have listened more carefully and verified the information instead of assuming the worst. Mira listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable yet thoughtful, and when he finished speaking she nodded gently, acknowledging his apology with a quiet grace that eased some of the tension in his shoulders, though she made no attempt to pretend that the experience had not mattered or that it could be erased easily, because she understood the importance of addressing mistakes with honesty rather than pretending they had no impact. She told him calmly that everyone made errors, but what mattered most was how they responded afterward, whether they learned from the experience or ignored its significance, and her voice carried no anger or bitterness, only a steady reminder of the responsibility he held as an officer. A reminder that struck him deeper than any reprimand could have because it came from someone he had wronged yet who still chose to address him with respect. Ryan nodded silently, feeling a mixture of relief and humility, and when she turned to leave he felt compelled to speak again, asking if she would allow him a chance to show that he had learned from the incident, though he did not know exactly what he hoped to prove or how he could make amends beyond offering sincere respect in every moment moving forward, and Mira paused briefly before giving him a small nod, accepting his willingness to grow without making promises she could not guarantee. The next few days brought small changes at the station as Ryan adjusted the way he approached his duties, taking extra time to verify information, listening carefully during community interactions, and choosing patience over assumption in situations that once would have triggered quick decisions, and though the other officers noticed his shift they did not tease or question him, sensing that his change came from a place of understanding rather than obligation. Meanwhile Mira continued her work at the courthouse, handling cases with her usual calm and thoughtful manner, but every now and then she remembered the night she had been taken in by mistake, not with anger but with quiet reflection, recognizing that one experience could shape a person in unexpected ways, teaching lessons that extended far beyond the moment itself. One afternoon Ryan arrived at the courthouse to deliver documents requested by the chief, and he found himself standing outside Myra's courtroom, waiting for the hearing inside to end. And when the doors finally opened he caught sight of her guiding both sides with remarkable clarity and fairness, treating each person with a balance of firmness and respect that left him deeply impressed, because seeing her in her element made him understand even more clearly how much grace she had shown the night he had taken her into custody. When she stepped out of the courtroom their eyes met briefly, and Ryan offered a respectful nod, one that carried gratitude, recognition, and a promise to uphold fairness the way she had demonstrated, and Mira returned the gesture with a calm expression before continuing down the hallway, the soft sound of her footsteps echoing gently behind her like a reminder that strength could exist in quiet forms and that dignity did not need to raise its voice to be heard. The next week moved with a quiet rhythm as both Mira and Ryan continued their separate routines, yet their paths crossed in small moments that carried new meaning. Moments that might have gone unnoticed before but now seemed important in ways neither of them had expected, because the experience they shared had changed something within them both, shaping the way they viewed responsibility and fairness, and teaching them that one unexpected night could echo far into the days that followed with lessons that continued to unfold, slowly like sunlight creeping across a long hallway at dawn. Each morning Mira arrived at the courthouse early, taking time to review her notes before hearings began, and she often paused at the window to watch the city come alive with soft movement, cars rolling down the streets, people walking with determined steps, each carrying their own stories and struggles, and she reminded herself that fairness required more than rules. It required understanding the quiet battles behind every person who stepped into her courtroom, a belief she carried close to her heart no matter how busy the day became or how challenging the cases were. Meanwhile Ryan found himself thinking more carefully during each shift, reviewing procedures with renewed focus, and taking extra care to speak calmly during stops, making sure he listened fully before making decisions, because he wanted to honor the lesson he learned from the night he had misjudged Mira, a lesson rooted not only in duty but also in respect for the dignity of every individual he encountered. And each day he felt a small shift inside him as he practiced this mindful patience, discovering that it made him a better officer and a better person. One afternoon Ryan found himself assigned to a community event near the courthouse where officers met with residents to discuss concerns and strengthen trust, and the moment he entered the open hall he noticed Mira speaking with a group of local youth, explaining how laws helped protect them and how fairness required courage from both sides. and her gentle tone mixed with her calm posture created an atmosphere of comfort that drew people toward her with ease, as though her presence alone could steady the room and remind everyone that justice was not only a system but a shared responsibility. Ryan hesitated before approaching, unsure whether it was the right moment, yet something guided his steps forward, and when Mira noticed him she offered a small nod of acknowledgement, neither warm nor distant, simply respectful, and he found himself standing beside her as she finished answering a question about how to handle misunderstandings with authorities, her response thoughtful and balanced, reminding the young listeners that communication mattered just as much as procedure, and Ryan silently appreciated her ability to speak with clarity without diminishing anyone's experience. When the group moved on, Mira glanced at him and asked how the station was adjusting to the recommendations she had provided during her visit, her tone steady and curious rather than judgmental, and Ryan answered honestly that the changes were slow but meaningful, that officers were becoming more aware of how quickly assumptions could harm interactions, and that he himself had started reviewing each stop twice before making decisions, wanting to ensure he honored the trust the community placed in them. And Mira listened with a quiet expression that suggested she understood the weight he carried. They walked together through the hall as more residents approached with questions, and Ryan watched how naturally Mira handled each conversation, treating every person with the same level of attention regardless of their age or background, and he felt a growing respect for her that extended beyond her title, recognizing the strength in her calm demeanor and the fairness she demonstrated so consistently, a fairness he admired deeply because it reminded him of the standard he hoped to meet someday. As the event came to an end, a sudden commotion rose near the entrance when a young man rushed inside in distress, explaining that his friend had collapsed outside and needed help, and without hesitation Ryan moved quickly with Mira close behind him, both responding with a kind of urgency that came from instinct rather than instruction. And when they reached the street they found a teenager seated on the curb with pale skin and unsteady breath, surrounded by worried onlookers who did not know what to do. Ryan knelt immediately and checked the boy's pulse while Mira guided the crowd to give him space, her calm voice steadying the tension in the air as she reassured them that help was on the way, and when the boy's breathing grew shallow Ryan spoke gently to him, encouraging him to stay awake until the ambulance arrived, offering steady words that carried warmth and focus, and the boy slowly responded with soft nods that eased the fear on his friend's face. When the ambulance finally arrived the paramedics took over and thanked Ryan and Mira for their quick response, and as the crowd dispersed Mira looked at Ryan with a thoughtful expression, quietly impressed by the care he had shown in a moment that required both swift action and calm leadership, and Ryan felt a quiet sense of pride as he realized that this moment reflected the kind of officer he wanted to be, one who helped without hesitation and listened with compassion. They walked back toward the hall in silence at first, but Mira eventually spoke, telling him that the way he handled the situation showed growth and understanding, that he had acted with patience and clarity, and Ryan felt a quiet warmth spread through him at her words, because coming from her the praise carried deep meaning, reminding him that forgiveness could stretch far beyond a single apology and could inspire real change when guided with sincerity and effort. As the sun dipped lower in the sky Ryan offered to walk her to her car, not out of obligation but out of respect, and they moved through the parking lot with unhurried steps, speaking about the challenges of their roles and the ways they tried to improve each day, and though their conversation remained professional it carried a quiet ease that had not existed before, a new sense of mutual understanding shaped by shared experience and a growing appreciation for the strengths they each brought into the world. When they reached her car Mira turned to him and thanked him not only for the assistance during the emergency but also for the effort he had made to reflect on his actions, telling him that true growth required humility and that she recognized the sincerity behind his change, and Ryan nodded with quiet gratitude, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest like a promise that he would continue to uphold the values she had reminded him of. As she got into her car and prepared to leave Ryan stepped back and watched her pull away, feeling a sense of clarity rise within him, a sense that his path had shifted towards something brighter and more grounded, shaped by the lessons of fairness and respect he had learned through her calm example, and as he walked back toward the station, he carried a new sense of purpose that would guide him through the days ahead, knowing that their story was not finished and that the next chapter would bring even deeper understanding between them. The following days unfolded with a calm rhythm that felt different from the weeks before, as if a quiet understanding had settled between Mira and Ryan like a soft thread connecting their paths, shaping their interactions with gentle clarity, and Ryan felt himself carrying her presence in the back of his mind not as a weight but as a reminder of how far he had come and how far he still hoped to go, guided by the lessons he learned through his mistake and through her steady example of fairness and dignity. Every morning he stepped into the station with renewed purpose, greeting people with more patience and approaching each task with deliberate care, and his fellow officers noticed the shift in his behavior, though none of them questioned it because the change was steady and sincere, reflecting a deeper maturity that spoke louder than any explanation he could offer. And Ryan found himself proud of the quiet growth that came from facing his flaws with honesty rather than avoiding them. On the other side of the city, Mira continued her work at the courthouse with her usual focus and calm presence, handling hearings with balance and guiding each case with thoughtful attention. Yet she found moments of reflection slipping into her thoughts, moments where she recalled standing on the curb that night and sitting in the holding area with steady breath, and she realized that the experience, though unpleasant, had widened her understanding of how quickly systems could fail good people, and how important it was for those in authority to move with both clarity and compassion. One morning a call came from the courthouse requesting an officer to deliver records to Myra's chambers, and Ryan was assigned the task without hesitation, unaware that another small moment of significance awaited him, and as he gathered the documents he felt a calm determination in his chest, a desire to greet her with the same respect she had shown him even in difficult moments, and he walked toward the courthouse with steady steps, his posture carrying an ease born from the strength he had gained through sincere effort. When he arrived, Mira was in her office reviewing a thick stack of papers, her robe draped neatly over the back of her chair, and her expression thoughtful as she read through the details before her, and when she looked up her eyes softened slightly in recognition, acknowledging him not only as the officer who had once misjudged her, but as someone who had taken responsibility with humility, and who had continued to grow from that moment forward. She thanked him for bringing the documents and motioned for him to wait as she signed several forms, her movements efficient yet graceful, and Ryan stood quietly near the doorway, observing her calm focus with a sense of admiration that went beyond titles or authority, admiration for her patience, her strength, and her unwavering fairness that seemed to guide her through every interaction no matter how small or large. When she finished signing she offered him a seat, wanting to speak for a moment, and Ryan felt a quiet surprise at the invitation but accepted it with gratitude, sitting across from her while sunlight streamed through the window, casting soft patterns across the polished desk, and the gentle atmosphere carried a sense of peace that allowed them to speak with a comfort that had grown slowly through their shared experiences. Mira asked him how he had been managing since the incident, not out of judgment or doubt but out of genuine interest in his growth, and Ryan explained how he had taken time to reflect deeply on his actions, how he had studied the procedures with greater focus, and how each day he tried to embody the patience he wished he had shown her on that difficult night. And Mira listened with an expression that conveyed respect for his honesty and appreciation for his commitment to doing better. She told him that mistakes did not define a person but their response to those mistakes did, and her words settled gently into the quiet space between them like a steady breath after a long pause, and Ryan nodded with deep sincerity, understanding that her forgiveness had not been automatic but had been given because she had seen his effort to change, and he felt a sense of gratitude that was difficult to express in words but clear in his quiet gaze. Their conversation flowed naturally from that point, touching on topics of fairness, responsibility, and the challenges both of them faced in their roles, and though the subjects were serious the tone remained warm and grounded, shaped by mutual respect and an emerging sense of ease that surprised them both, and Ryan found himself appreciating not only her wisdom but also the calm strength she brought into every space she entered. As the days passed their interactions became more frequent, sometimes through work and sometimes through chance, and each time they spoke a new layer of understanding grew between them, not built on dramatic moments but on small steady exchanges that revealed their shared values and their mutual desire to do right by the people they served, and Ryan felt a growing admiration for Mira that went beyond the respect he had for her role as a judge. One late afternoon they met again at a community forum where residents voiced their concerns about safety and fairness, and Mira sat beside Ryan as they listened to each person speak, offering guidance when needed and taking notes with thoughtful attention, and Ryan noticed that whenever she spoke the room grew calmer, as though her voice carried a quiet assurance that encouraged trust, and he felt grateful to be working alongside someone who understood both strength and empathy so deeply. When the forum ended they walked outside together, the sky painted with soft shades of gold and rose as the sun slipped toward the horizon, and the gentle evening light made the moment feel almost peaceful, a step away from the weight of their responsibilities, and Mira paused near the steps of the building, taking in the calm before turning to Ryan with a thoughtful expression that carried both gratitude and quiet understanding. She told him that the journey from misunderstanding to trust was never easy but always meaningful, and that she appreciated the sincerity he had shown throughout the process, and Ryan felt a warmth rise in his chest at her words, recognizing that this moment was not simply about forgiveness but about the connection they had built through patience and honesty, a connection that had grown slowly through shared challenges and mutual respect. He thanked her gently, his voice steady yet full of emotion he did not fully express, and they stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last light of day fade into the soft blue of early evening, and in that quiet space between them something unspoken settled like a promise, a sense that their paths would continue to move forward with understanding, and that the trust they had built would remain strong as time carried them into new chapters of their lives. As they parted for the evening, Ryan walked away with a renewed sense of purpose, feeling the strength of everything he had learned through knowing her, and Mira watched him leave with a soft, thoughtful expression, recognizing that even difficult experiences could lead to unexpected growth and meaningful connections when met with courage and sincerity, and she felt a quiet gratitude for the way their story had unfolded. The night settled peacefully over the city as both of them returned to their routines, carrying within them the quiet certainty that fairness was not only a rule but a path, one they would continue to walk with patience and understanding, woven together by a story that began with a misunderstanding but grew into something far deeper and more meaningful than either of them could have expected.